So for 365, some of you students this quarter, it's fall 2020, you know I'm working a lot from home in this hybrid model. This is a gallery space, have some couple other artists, like here's Al Tennant in here. But most of this is mine, and then some of it's my wife's, even some of it's mine I made with some kids' pieces that they drew and put those on the cups. So like this is where I work, sometimes via a Zoom here with you. But in here is my actual workspace. This is the studio here. We actually have kids, we have kids classes that come in during COVID. There's a pod of kids, so there will be some other work being done in here. I'm still, although it's not a throwing class for 365, I'm throwing a lot of cups lately. Here's some that I have to put handles on. But I just want you to know where I'm working from. In this first assignment for 365, it's kind of a springboard from what you have done in 265 with some hand-built serving vessels, bowls and plates primarily. And I'm introducing you more to polystyrene. I gave you all a pre-cut mold that I cut for you, but I'm gonna open up these ideas of other materials and more advanced techniques with this first assignment. As it is an intermediate hand building class, we're gonna do a whole bunch of different techniques that you've already done, but we're gonna take them to another level. You're still gonna work with some cardboard too, and I'll show you some of that. I would say even like some of these around here, I might have done this one here as a demonstration for you last quarter with a cardboard mold. So remember, there's all these places to get cardboard. Cardboard's free, and therefore it's a lot more readily available. If you want to get the polystyrene, like I mentioned, Knutson Lumber has it. You can go get boxes in a variety of places. I've reused these priority mail boxes, and you can see how I use those for molds too. Another thing that you're going to be working with is thinking about engobes or colored slips and different ways to work. Although we're working with wood firing process, these are all wood fired, and like the head behind you is the type of clay that you got with your lab fee. This is the clay that you purchase. You see the difference between this porcelain with these more fleshy tones and lighter tones and the brown tone of this piece. So you're gonna expand on some of those ideas of surface more also. All right, great, 365A students, you have I already made these molds, you can use these. I'm gonna expect you to make some of your own also for this first assignment. We're gonna be looking at hand building techniques using slip molding and slab building and coils and all of the things that you learned as a Ceramics 1 student, but we're gonna push it a little bit further. So just to get started, you already have these. Now, when cutting polystyrene, if you need to wear a mask, you're wearing a mask anyway, but you may need my help for that. So I'm gonna cover in the online content using cardboard, which you don't need my help for. So if you do choose to like push it and buy some polystyrene, you can buy that at Knutson here in town down Vantage Highway. The polystyrene comes in 4 by 8 foot sheets or bigger, and it comes in certain thicknesses. This is a great thickness. It's a like 1.5 inch thickness, and that's good enough to use for slip molds. And it's got a rigidity to it that's really nice, and it cuts easy. However, cardboard's free. This stuff can run you a little bit of money, and so it's probably something, if you want to really take off with this technique, you might invest in some and split it a sheet with somebody or something. I have a jigsaw that I can help you with, and again, I've done demonstrations, online content for this technique. So just to get started, you have, again, the lab fees covered here and in the wood and in some other expendables here, but got some nice stoneware here that'll be really nice in the wood kiln. And I'm assuming that you all know how to use a rolling pin at least, because you went through that. But we also have, again, the slab roller over here. You can certainly just use this for a quick reference, but you use these canvases and it's really simple to think about. The thickness of your hand is what you want to have with the canvas coming through. What I mean by that is the thickness of my hand. So there's a fold here. So I fold the canvas in half, and I want at least that much coming through. Otherwise, it could go under this table, and then it's a nightmare. To adjust the thickness, all your work this quarter, you can have it, there's a knob up here, and you can have it metering at about no more than a ½ an inch and no less than a ¼ inch. So here's the ¼ inch mark, and here's the ½ inch mark. And so somewhere around there is a nice thickness, depending on the scale of the object you're making. The wheel only goes one way. If you spin it the other way, it doesn't make that ratchet sound, and it eventually spins up, so be careful. So you want to make sure that it's doing that sound, okay? Then you have your clay prepared to be no more than twice as thick as the desired thickness of the slab. So if you're going to go with a ¼ inch, you don't want this piece of clay. You're going to open up that canvas so you can put it right here. You put your clay there, and again, you don't want it any more than twice as thick. You can have it pretty close to the thickness, the desired thickness, by patty caking using rolling pin or whatever to get it down. Then you put it up into this crotch, you pull the canvas back down over that clay, and you turn the wheel. You see I'm turning it towards me to make these rollers suck it in. I would say even like some of these around here, I might have done this one here as a demonstration for you last quarter with a cardboard mold. So remember, there's all these places to get cardboard. Cardboard's free, and therefore it's a lot more readily available. If you want to get the polystyrene, like I mentioned, Knutson Lumber has it. You can go get boxes in a variety of places. I've reused these priority mail boxes, and you can see how I use those for molds too. Okay, I'm going to briefly go over what's covered in that more in-depth video. Again, that's on Gustav Pottery channel, and you can check that out to really see a whole bunch more about slabs. But just as intermediate students, I don't want to bore you. You already know most of that stuff. So, but as a refresher, I suggest looking back at it. 2x4, some kind of mallet, or your hands to get it close before you use a rolling pin or before you use slab rollers. First, I'm gonna do like that, so it doesn't make so much noise. So do one with the slab roller just to go over it really quickly, and one with the rolling pin. Remember from that original exposure to it, there's ways to put slats of wood and do all these other things. Again, go back to that. It's like an hour-long one just on making slabs if you want a refresher on that. It's good to get your 2x4 on there, or some kind of mallet, or something nice about that. Remember, the table you're using should be you should be moving it so it doesn't stick to the table. There's something really nice about the compression from mallets slabs. Now, of course, you also see me just do slabs with mallets. Okay? Bigger mallets, smaller mallets, and then those never even use a rolling pin or a slab roller. So remember, there's more ways to skin a cat. So when I prepare the slab for the slab roller, I want to use that slab roller. Again, look at that, how you put your hand, like get the canvas through, get it a thickness and put that in. I'm going to show you that again here, but I'm not going to talk about it. But make your slab twice as thick or a little less than that, than the desired measurements that you put on there. All right. So here's one that I've paddled out. Now take my rolling pin, and you know, as a baker, you want to think about how even your crust is. As a sculptor, maybe not as much, but as a potter, definitely you want to think about how even it is. So remember how you can throw your slabs too. And there's a way to like really, you know, if you have an extra amount, you can cut it and really look at the thickness of it and see that how even it is. And you can do it, you know, both ways. So you look at that thickness. If you have a little extra, remember when you're doing all that, all these scraps go. You can dip them in water if they're getting a little hard. Dip them in water, stick them in your plastic bag. Save all your clay. Be really frugal with it, or you're going to run out of clay. So don't do that. Don't run out of clay. Remember to order some of that nice Helmar porcelain from that phone number I gave you. This is the stoneware that I mixed for you with your lappy. It is a nice clay to work with, but every clay has its qualities, right? So with this clay, I'm going to really want to smooth it out as best as I can with the porcelain or this clay. That Helmar porcelain, the Helmar kaolin clay, however, is got not a lot of particles in it that you could even sponge it down a little. You don't want to sponge it too much if there's joints, but you can work the surface with kind of a smoothing reductive technique with sponges and green pads and stuff. If it is dry, you do think about you're wearing a mask all the time in our studio. If you're working at home, then like I am, if I was doing any of that, I would be wearing a mask to protect myself. Again, not just from COVID, but from now silica. So I make you wear masks all the time in clay. So this is just one more thing. Anyway, with that, you don't want to breathe in any free silica. So you want to make sure that you're always working wet. So if you're sponging, obviously you don't have to wear a mask. So with that clay, you'll see that you can smooth out the surface in a different way. Okay, in this clay, it's got some grog and some sand in it. This is my body where it has a little bit of white silica sand, and then it's got some grog. And if you sponge it, you're intermediate. As a Clay 2 student, you want to think about your surface just like you did as a Clay 1 student, but you really want to fine tune that. Make sure you don't have like really nasty, overworked, groggy surfaces, unless you're looking towards that crunchy surface on purpose, which we can talk about. But and so when you're working with this stoneware compared to that porcelain, it's more about using tools and your fingers in a moist way, not a wet way. But don't want to use a sponge, or the grog comes to the surface, because the sponge wipes away all those fine particles, okay? So I have this slab prepared. It's ready. Now, I'm just gonna grab the camera and move it over here and show you the slab roller again. And there's a brown canvas and a white canvas in there. And the brown canvas is for terracotta, don't use that. So you get the fold right about halfway. Then you set your measurement by using this knob. So this slab roller here I have at home, same one that's at school. And those of you who had me last quarter never had a slab roller to use, so make sure you do this. This is a main issue here, okay? Is that you see how much canvas I've gotten through here. See that? That fold has come through there. Do not neglect that, or it could get sucked under the table and you have a not a good day, okay? So, all right, I got that. Then I take the canvas, like I said, earlier in this video. I open it up, and then this is what you didn't see. I just take the clay, kind of jam it in that crotch between the canvas and the other canvas. Pull that canvas back over the clay, so now the canvas is on top and on the bottom. And I turn the wheel towards myself. Remember, if it's not making this ratchet sound, you're turning it the wrong way. All right. So it is a little quicker, and you're guaranteed this real specific thickness, all right? So I'll compress that slab. What I suggest, this isn't a requirement for purchase, but I love these drywall knives for compressing slabs, and they're really well worth the money. You can get a plastic one too, but I'd invest in one of these, and you can slide across the surface. Now, if you don't have an extra $7 or $8, or I don't know how much these are now, you use the tools in your toolkit, like your metal rib. You can use that, but I would at least get one of those plastic ones that's like $1. It's really worth it to really compress the slab. Compressing the slab on the back and the front of the slab, or whatever, both sides of the slab, is pretty integral to getting a good slump for these pieces you're making. Okay, so remember to do both sides. You saw me flip the one that I use the rolling pin for, and you saw me do that, all right? So I'm only gonna slump one. I'll slump this one. I'll move the camera back over to my other cart. Very much like the mold you have. The smaller mold, like if you make smaller ones for your bowls, you're gonna find out that the plate ones, the bigger plate ones, are going to be a little bit, in a way, easier to slump, because the volume of that negative space compared to that is larger, and it allows you to kind of coax or lift that clay and let gravity occur, okay? All right, so I have this, what I often do is I don't want to have too much clay, so I may, and again, this is the one I did with the rolling pin, and you can see how even that is, and it's even this way too. It's all the same thickness. And again, why is that? Because I switched directions. You saw me do it. Let me explain it one more time with words, and you go this way, that way, all the time, lifting that clay to release it from the tension of the table so it doesn't stick down there, okay? All right, anyway, I don't want a big piece. I don't want a piece that's huge, like with too much clay. I want maybe 3 inches maximum, larger than the negative space that I'm slumping in. And this is all going to be directive in terms of how large of a rim I can have on my bowl or my plate. And later with serving vessels, you think about this, how large of a rim. And we'll talk about that when I get to the surface work here. All right, so I can lift up on it if it's big enough. I can just lift up on that rim until it naturally slumps down in there. And you can see as this is going down into that negative space. Some people will go like this and let gravity do it. And sometimes that's enough. You can kind of check on the bottom to see if it's actually created a flat enough spot for that bowl or that plate to actually sit firmly. That's irrelevant if you're thinking about feet, and we're going to discuss feet. You're going to see feet on bowls and plates and stuff in the lecture, and you see that plate bowl lecture. Just reiterating that, you saw that before, and it's gonna make you think about, what do I do? And I'll show you some just really simple ones that I did as demos over here. When I do some surface work, I'll show you the feet. It's something that then the curvature of this, you might just do something like this, all right? So the other ways are to coerce it into that space, all right? So I would want a nice wear board with a nice surface, maybe I've told you about plywood already, but you might actually lay down a nice piece of paper. The wrinkles could come up if it's an old piece of paper. If it's thicker, it can leave a little decal from the paper, a little texture from the paper. You could actually play with ideas like that, like deckled edges of paper, that when you press the clay down into this negative space, it's going to get embossed from what's under it. So, I mean, feasibly, I said use a nice smooth board, but what if you used a board that was super textured with an intense wood, piece of bark even? Starts to get a little bit sophomoric, let's say, but you have to start somewhere thinking about how you think about the surface of your work, okay? I'm gonna stick to the simple that isn't so simple. And the simple that isn't so simple is having a really smooth surface on the piece. And I like that as a painter. Sometimes I don't want surface. Sometimes as a painter, I want a little sculptural quality. You know, you think about that idea of the thickness of the paint. Sometimes the thickness of the clay can translate into that. So with your surface, you are free to go any direction, and you'll see examples of that in contemporary and historic pieces that I've exposed you to. All right, so the sledding technique that you learn as a Clay 1 student here in Clay 2, you're going to advance that knowledge, remembering that this is one of the tools to really manipulate the surface. Now, because I have a natural tendency to push more as I come towards me, I might have this side slumped in a little deeper than this side, so I always move it, turn it around, and swipe and sled towards me this way to try and even it out. And I can look at the bottom and I can see what's going on. I know that you can see a flat area there, and I know I have that, okay? All right, now my decision is to think about this edge. What do you do with that rim? Okay, for you have so much freedom here. This can be thought about where you're doing some of that surface work that's required. You're using the underglazes that I asked you to purchase to be a painter. And you're using this as a three-dimensional canvas. Think about that. These pieces are to play with either abstract or representational imagery that you're going to play with these colors. But as a sculptor, you also know how to do all kinds of hand building techniques, coils, even smaller slumps, additive, subtractive techniques that you can use this rim for. Okay, so don't hesitate to experiment and think about that. These areas here on your pieces can be thought about as focal points. In here, there's that French artist that I showed you with all the snakes and stuff, that historic piece that you can think about. You could be a sculptor. So you are open to kind of pushing the ideas of the utilitarian direction of any one of these assignments, okay? But what I'm saying is that the rim doesn't negate the utility of this area as much. I mean, yeah, food could get caught in it, but so you could make a piece that would be more in the lines of some of the stuff I showed you from South America. And you can see some of those bowls that are really sculptural, or plates with rims that have a lot of stuff going on, okay? So if I think about the stuff from Colombia or other historic pieces, think for where you're getting your influences from. What really do you like, and how you can think about these plates and bowls and everything you do this quarter in terms of how you encompass some direction and create your visual voice, okay? All right, so when I cut this rim, I can think about cutting it really straight like I'm going to, or I can think about curves, or I can think about cutting a lot of it off and leaving big pieces. Maybe it's where a fork would lay, or a sculptural element would be, okay? So I have all of that clay going around here. I don't want to use all of it. I'll tell you what happens if you do too much here is that the weight can warp the edge during the firing, okay? So I'm gonna go like this. I'm gonna I could measure with a ruler, so that's something that you should all have is a ruler if you want to be really precise, or I could eyeball it. And I'll show you the ones that are greenware that when we talk about the surface work. So I cut these edges off, and again, this is all good clay. Dip it in water, wrap it in the plastic, reuse it, okay? Don't waste your clay or you will run out this quarter, and I'm not gonna use that as an excuse to not finish a piece. So make sure you are prepared. The clay that I mixed for you should last quite a while if you're diligent about this. The clay you order comes in about 2 days, okay? So make sure you have ordered it. If you're still confused about that, please ask me. All right, so I kind of loosely cut this edge around here, just more eyeballing. If I want it, again, precision, I should measure it. I'm not too interested in that, actually, but some people are. I can work this edge while it's still in the mold. And so, not wet hands, just kind of moist fingers. And if my fingers start to get dirty, covered in clay, if you look at them, they're just got moisture on the tips. They can act like your rib in that sledding process, and they can shape that edge so it's not squared off. You can round out that edge really nicely, and you can do that while it's in the mold without manipulating that edge. The other side, once you pop it out of the mold, it'll be harder to do this, but it'll be drier, so you shouldn't be manipulating it too much. So the question always lies in, you only have one mold and 4 pieces, and this is just a starting mold by the way. I want you to think about a shape. If you like this rectangle shape, you can go with it, but I want you to cut your own molds out of cardboard as you have in the past as Clay 1 students. But if you like this shape, that's fine, but you're limited. You have to wait till this comes out. Remember, you could take it out. If it's a bigger piece, it's harder, as you remember from Clay 1, but you could stuff it with plastic and flip it out, but that can mark up this nice surface that you got. And so it is nice to have a few molds that you're waiting for them to stiffen up to get out. Or you cheat, which is not really cheating, but using a hairdryer. You can force dry them a little. I would not do that if you did any additive work, all right? Okay, so from here, I have like 20 of these molds up there. So I just leave them in the mold if I want to keep that edge. What happens is they pop off the mold with this material. And with cardboard, if you're using cardboard, it absorbs water, whereas this stuff doesn't. And it comes right out of the mold pretty quickly, right? You know that from the past. So what I would suggest is, setting up a few, experimenting, looking at shapes that you want, all right? I'm gonna just let this one sit up. I'm gonna run over here now and talk about the surface work. All right, so I think there's one major thing that you can think of as how you think about your surface. There's so many different ways to be effective with it, and you think about, as a painter, how you treat your surface. Of course, it starts with, every brush has a particular way that it's going to mark the piece. Like these longer ones I made out of that's my dog hair and some skunk, and then I have some fox, and the type of hair you're going to use. You get these different brushes that would be good for stencils and other techniques, and those paper stencil techniques I can expose you to again. There's all these different ways to think about how you get the imagery on the surface of your pieces, okay? So we're only just talking about the underglaze directions right now because it seems really great for where we're going this quarter. You know, there's also, you may have seen some of my meme pieces, political pieces that I've done that are based off of memes, and those are ceramic decals. So ceramic decals can be made. They can be used in conjunction with this and in conjunction with glazes. As we're focusing on the wood firing technique, I think one of the things that you can think about is, yes, glazes work well, the kind of clay you use. That's why you're using two different types of clay. The voice of the clay itself. And then in terms of these underglazes that I've asked you to purchase, these are the big bottles. You purchased the little bottles, and if you could afford it, I said get the big bottles because they're more cost effective. With these underglazes, there's all kinds of commercial underglazes. Here's another brand that's awesome. This is an awesome brand. These are Amico. This one is Speedball. What I want you to take home from this is the idea of, like, there's all these directions to go with it, from mixing your own underglazes or on-gobes, which are sort of self-vitrifying. They get kind of glassy more. And slips. And to me, the word underglaze, on-gobe, they're all just slips. Not the same as the slip, however, it could be, that you use to score, scratch, and slip for your glue on your joints. You could color the actual clay you're using, and that could be a slip that you use on your clay. And so with that in mind, there are stains that you can add to it. Degussa is one brand. Mason stain is another. There's a lot of different stains, and these stains come at a higher cost than metallic oxides that you can use too. And so you can use metallic oxides, but they're not necessarily a specific color until you start really knowing it. And so, you know, if you want a real basic good blue, you could use cobalt. But with the stains, they have a lot of stuff that, as the underglazes do too, they have a lot of stuff that might not necessarily be safe if you just use that oxide. We know lead's bad, for instance. So, you know, there's a lot of metallic oxides that you could use as colorants that have been gone through a process called fritting. So as intermediate students, I'm trying to expose you to a little bit more here in terms of the chemistry around what you're doing. Do you need to know all that? Not necessarily, but I think it's great to know. For the cost effectiveness, but also for you to create your own palette and just be a chemist in a way. So you could always start out with some good some good white slip. This is just some white slip, and you can start out with a good white slip recipe. Or if you're already going dark, you could use a darker clay too. And you can then add percentages of those stains, body stains. You can actually stain the body, the clay body itself. But in this idea of how I become a painter, mixing your own paints is not something that a lot of painters still do. I know one, James Biederman, he's a great painter out of New York City who still mixes his own paints a lot. So it does happen. In the clay world, we do it a lot, you know, because, again, cost effective, and we're also creating the color we want. We have a little more control in that realm. Because we're not really in the painting world, you can mix these things and you get what you get when you see it. But we're running it through that process of fire, and we don't really have real good grasp. So I think the commercial ones are good because you know when you buy that particular one and you've tested it that it's going to be that color every time, okay? So it's a great way to work, all right? So again, you start out with, how do I apply it? If I'm looking at a overall, so if I want to take that white and I want to put white over, because this one's a stoneware one, so the white over this browner clay could be nice. And then I could do black or other colors over the white. I could start out thinking about like kind of gessoing an area of my canvas, but not the whole piece, right? Or I could gesso, I'm using gesso as a word that you're familiar with maybe because you've painted. But I can use that white as a background or a starting point. And I can build off of that. Now, layering, you get too thick sometimes and you have problems, but you'll know this through experimentation. But I look at the piece, again, there's the bottom of the piece, there's the top, there's the sides. How do I look at it as a three-dimensional canvas? And I may have imagery that works all the way around it, which I do a lot. So if you, let's say, have a representational thing going on, maybe the arm on this figure wraps around and goes underneath the piece. If it's abstract, maybe it's this shape that's going to wrap around. And it's going to pull the viewer around when they're using it. But also when it's sitting there, you can think about how something in here might lead to something out here or vice versa. Okay, so compositional elements are something to start really playing with. And how do we compose this piece to think about our aesthetic goals, our conceptual goals, and how to use it to make the viewer or user of the object interested in all of it from the bottom to the top. I'm going to reiterate what Linda Threadgill, a metals professor I had, said, that the back of a piece, like a pin or earring, is just as important. And as a utilitarian direction, I think the interiors, everything has an equality in a way. Yes, there could be a focal point on the face, on the face of it, right? But compositionally, it could be boring if it's just like this sticker on there. And I do boring things too, but you know, so sometimes it needs to be just right there. But I want you to think about that, all right? So now, again, brushes, they have a voice. If I'm going to lay down that white, I'm going to use a brush, like a fatter brush, hake brush, or they come in all kinds of widths. And you can, of course, get all kinds of different brushes at the hardware store or at our local art supply store or the bookstore. And you can think about the brush as a voice in and of itself. So, you know, a sumi brush, I got a nicer one over here to show you the point on this one. Let me back it up. It's really a fine point. And if I push down on it, it gets fat. If I lift up on it, when I do a line, it gets skinny, really skinny, like super, like smaller than a pencil. So if I want to do a black line that has line variation, or you think about calligraphy in general, I'd use a sumi brush. So if you look behind me, that is all done with one brush, you know, and there's all that different line quality to that piece. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe I'll lift this up. So if you look at, you know, sumi painting or calligraphy in general, it's something to take into account. But, you know, as art students, you're taught about line variation in your foundation courses. And sometimes a heavier weight around a corner, you know, creates sort of a shadow almost too. So I want you to think about the type of brush you use, all right? So when to do it, how to do it is thinking about the brush first. And when to do it, it all depends on the thickness of that slip too. So when you get these, you can water them down slightly. These are pretty thick. The velvets and the rewards from Amico, those are brand names. It's like puffs with lotion and without lotion. And you can think about a thinner application of them, you know. And so when to do it could be reflective of that too. This piece is bone dry, and if you read the backs of these, it'll tell you when you can. And most of them say they can go on greenware or on bisqueware. This one says, for an opaque coverage, apply 3 flowing coats to greenware or bisqueware. So the opacity of it is going to be something you can play with, is what I'm getting at. Maybe just do 1 coat and it's less opaque. And that layer over that layer could create this color. These are things that through experimentation and actually doing it, you're going to learn certain things that work and certain things that don't work. All right. So I'm going to set up and just have you watch me do this, but I want the camera to be focal point down. And so I'll set it up so you can see what I'm doing when I'm doing my brushwork. Okay, so I have a better angle on what I'm doing here. Again, if I'm going to think about that piece, maybe I've done some drawings, maybe I've, got some ideas on what I want to do. And again, opacity, I put 2 coats on there. See what that does in comparison to 3. I mean, the thing about when it says that on the bottle, you really don't know how thick of a coat it is. If you're going to put it on greenware, what is it, bone dry? Is it leather hard? And if it's leather hard or bone dry, it's going to absorb more. So maybe I'm putting too much on. But I have this corner on this piece now, and I'm thinking about that, and have something emanate over here with a different slip or ungo. So I'm going to switch over to one that I mix. It's just a white slip with some rutile, which has titanium, a bunch of other stuff. So it's a rutile. So this slip has a pretty beautiful quality when it gets a lot of flux. And it can actually melt a lot. So I don't want to put it too far at the bottom, but I want to put it wrapping around here like I suggested, like how you start playing with that idea. Maybe just for a demo, I'll just do this very limitedly. Sometimes the bottoms on pieces could have quite substantial amount of information on them. Okay, and then this red that comes from that speedball is pretty strong red, actually. And if you look at it, you can see one coat. You can't really see it too well, but I can kind of see that it's going to be more like a red veil rather than a red, real opaque area. And so I'm thinking about how this line flows through, and then I'll wrap that red around the corner, same way that I did that. Well, maybe I'll make it more opaque here, though. So as it wraps around the corner, it gets a little stronger red. All right, so I mean, this is just taking this in a simple way. You can go to town on this. You can think about where you go after this with black lines, and those black lines, again, depends on the type of brush you have. This is squirrel. Squirrel. And you see how you can make a nice long line with a long brush. You can do that with a short brush, and it could be a shakier line. How you hold the brush, again, is going to determine some things. And I'm just dragging it in this time. I have that Sumi brush I originally showed you. I'll show you how that works too. So I can do curves with this one pretty well. And because this is bone dry, it's fragile. Remember that. I know you're Clay 2 students, but you may have learned that a bit last quarter, how the fragility of a piece gets worse as it gets drier. When it's leather hard, it's got some kind of structure, right? But when it's at this bone dry state, it gets a little more fragile. So I like to think about a lot of things with my work, and you can question me on like, why do I do this work? A lot of the imagery I do is representational too, but in the idea of the abstract, I think about calligraphic mark making a lot. Try and hold it so you can see what I do. And so that, again, pushing on the brush or not pushing on the brush gives a line variation, thick to thin line. So this is when you think about how you hold a brush more. So I think about cursive, I think about a lot of things with writing, but the other thing that works its way into this this body of work that I do is ideas around textile imagery. And so sometimes you see a repetitive stitched line or even hidden words. So within the calligraphic mark making, sometimes there's foreign languages that I work in or English. Sometimes you don't see it right away. Okay, I try and hide that. So the idea of like repetition and that, here I'll use this to, you think about not just how you design things. So here's a red, I'll do a red dotted line over this other red. So this is a Amico. It's called Radiant Red, Amico, and so it really does look different than the other red. And when these both fire, they're going to be more vibrant. So the idea of playing with not just one blue or one red, you know, you have some kind of limitations. Cost-wise, these add up pretty quickly. So that's something to take into account, though. As a painter, you're going to play with blending colors too. So you don't just pour it out of the tube when you're painting. You don't just squirt it out of the tube. You think about how you can mix. However, as a ceramic artist, it doesn't always work out that way. So you got to experiment. Like, you can't just say, oh, this color and this color are going to make this color. You know, red and blue don't necessarily make purple, is what I'm getting at. Okay, so you got to experiment and see what does work. Okay, so that was all additive techniques to play with the surface of this. Now there are a plethora of tools to use, from a sharp needle tool to a bigger loop tool or a really small loop tool. And I don't do this too often anymore, but sometimes that's where I would work words in too. And so I'll just see what happens here. We got this thing where, you know, it used to be 13 was a really bad number. And then 666 is a really bad number, but I'm going to put a really bad number here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's 2020. You may have seen a meme that goes around. It's like numbers comparing who's the baddest number. Well, we know 2020 is, we're going to make it better, right? 2020 is hindsight. All right, so what I'm showing you here is you could think about conceptual directions this way, of course, and maybe that's a loose concept right there. But you can think about doing reductive techniques to incorporate one more type of line quality, okay? And it could be a way to really pull out something that a brush couldn't do. So and I'll just play with this a little more, just show you what I mean. This technique of carving back through a slip in the Greek world, or you look at Romans, you look through China, you can see it too. You look through a lot of cultures, you see people carving back through it. But that line, you see the line that I carved back through the white slip to the stoneware clay. Okay, so that'll be a brown line because the clay itself is more brown. It's called sgraffito. But basically, you're carving back through, and that's just adding one more way for you to play. So how you carve back through, like I said, a big fat line, or like I showed you with this teeny loop tool. So it's the smallest. This one is a brand name of Kemper, and Dolan makes them. A bunch of people make them, and you could even make one out of a bent paper clip, and then duct tape it to the end of a pencil, and see how that works. So you think about piano wire and other types of wires you can use to make your own tools. But sgraffito tools, you can purchase those online from a variety of sources. You can find them at the bookstore, or a local art supply store sometimes has them too. So surface work is important for this assignment. Make sure you do it. It's why I sent out the materials list before class started. When I ordered it, it took 3 days to get here. You can, if you're on the other side, you can go to Tacoma Clay Art Center and buy any underglazes. If you want to order from someone local in the state, you can do that too. But it's just, again, I tried to get you prepared to make sure you had this surface work stuff. All right. So that's a simple. Your bowls and your plates, they have a due date. All the assignments have this finished kind of surface work that you want to get done on them by that due date. Okay, so make sure you use, my cuckoo clock's going off. So make sure you use the time wisely. Get these pieces done so you can spend some time on the surface. Especially like what I did here was pretty quick work. It's more in the lines, if I was doing something more representational, it might take me longer, or if I did more detail in abstract work, it would take me longer. All right, so the finished products, as we get down to that, I'm gonna just show you a couple. Like, this is the clay I asked you to order. This is got a lot of nice qualities in the wood kiln, and those are some. These are the slips that I asked you to order, the underglazes that I asked you to order. Okay. And this is the clay I mixed for you, and that's the same yellow, so it's not quite as vibrant, but that's the clay itself. You can see there's a brown quality to it, and I did this as a demo. This has got a bird on it. Put a bird on it. So when you look at it, if you want to look at this assignment, if you have prepared like I asked you to prepare, and got that clay already, you could think about having your bowls be that porcelain Helmar clay that you ordered, or your plates being that, or they can both be stoneware or both be porcelain. Anyway, I want you to experiment with these different clays because they have really interesting different visual voices to play with. All right, as we get going, as you get rolling, literally rolling with the rolling pin or the slab roller, if there's any questions or any help that you need, you know you can call on me. So make sure you use me, set up individual Zoom appointments for my quote office hours, or use those set up Zoom appointments to show me what you're doing so I can help you along the way. All right, hey, have a good one.